Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast with the Words of Life team, Kevin and Adam. We are really excited to dive back into the book of Hebrews and probably what is most commonly known as the book of, or chapter of faith, chapter 11. Let's dive right in. All right. Welcome back again. We're really excited about this week's podcast. It's quite possibly the most referenced chapter in the
Yeah,
book
in
of
Hebrews.
Hebrews by far. Chapter 11 is what we're going to be studying today. And I'm pretty stoked about that. But before we dive in, we always like to just kind of catch up and how's everything going? How was your little mini vacation?
Yeah, it was good. Ran down to San Diego and saw some friends and family, and then up to Disneyland, and so that was fun. And then got back into town. Melissa had to go back to work, but I had the rest of the week off, and all this week as well. So,
Wow,
yeah,
that's
I
awesome.
spent the end of my week when we got back being sick, so that wasn't fun. But
Okay.
now it's a week of honeydews around the house. It looks like
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Well, a lot of people will know, but I'm a singer. I've been singing my whole life, and I sing a lot of barbershop music, a cappella stuff, and I sing with a chorus in Cleveland, Tennessee, called the Sound of Tennessee. And we just went to a barbershop contest convention this weekend for the Southeastern Harmony District, and we qualified to compete at the international contest,
nice.
which will happen in July in Denver, Colorado. So really excited about that. So we're officially making plans to go to Denver in July, right around 4th of July. And yeah, pretty excited. My quartet also competed, and we did pretty well. So we had a great time. A lot of it's you only have like 10 minutes on
Right.
stage a couple of times, right? But everything else about the weekend is really what is so rewarding. You get to see people you don't get to see very often and sing with people and have, just all the camaraderie involved. So much fun. And then I got to worship at a congregation I never met before on Sunday morning, which is cool. The Gadsden, Alabama Church of Christ. So
Nice.
yeah, it was great meeting some new folks and worshiping with them. So very very much fun. But I am exhausted, so yeah, it wears you out. It takes a little bit to catch up on all that stuff. So
Yep.
well, let's dive in. Last week we were able to finish chapter 10, and I'll pull up our text here real quick. Just kind of go back to a recap here right at the end of chapter 10. It was probably is a pretty good chapter break point. Not all of
Yeah.
them are. This one was pretty good, but he ends there by saying, but we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. So he's talking about the fact that we have faith, and our faith will preserve our souls. And then he jumps into chapter 11, and we're going to go ahead and just read the first 6 verses and pause for a bit for a little bit of discussion, and then we'll do 7 through 16, followed by through 31, and then the end of the chapter. So we'll have like 4 reading blocks today
Yeah.
to get through chapter 11. So why don't you take the first 6, Kevin, and
Sure.
we'll go from there.
Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it, the people of old received their commendation. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, through which he was commended as righteous, God commending him by accepting his gifts. And through his faith, though he died, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. Now, before he was taken, he was commended as having pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him.
Yep. And growing up with the New King James, that's one of the
Yes.
kind of one of the memory verses that's embedded in my head. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For what is the actual phrase right after that? I'll have to look it up. I called it a memory verse, but all I remember is that that now I don't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. That whole section there, right? Verse 1,
Yeah,
if you're the old King James, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence
correct.
of things not seen, right?
Yep.
Is probably how I remember that from when I was
Hmm.
a kid. Certainly. But yeah, he's talking here as he, makes his
Yeah.
connection, right? Back from the end of the previous chapter where he had said, like you had pointed out, that we are those who are on the path of the faithful ones. And he had cited Habakkuk there, which had said, "My righteous ones shall live by faith," right? And so then he's now going to go through and basically lay out, this example of all these in the past who
Yeah.
are righteous and who live by faith, even under the old law, and even here predating the old law. And he's kind of go, in chronological order, if you will, right? If you're a Jew, running through the history of the world and the Jewish people. And so, yeah, he starts all the way back to, this idea that by faith understand the universe was created, right?
Yeah.
When no one was there. And so we starts at the very, very beginning, and he'll go through the chapter here,
Hmm.
listing off certain things. So.
Yeah, and this idea of what is seen versus what is not seen, what is not visible. God is spirit. We read and we must worship him in spirit and in truth. And then we talk about all the people who listened to God's word, abided by His word in the truth. And then He has all these righteous people. So, we have a famous story of Cain and Abel. But it's not just about what Cain did to Abel, but what precipitated that was the offering that they were giving to God. And it was apparent. This actually gives us the explanation that's not really found in the book of Genesis,
That's right.
right? That Cain offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain, um, and he was commended as righteous, which means that he was doing right, which infers that there was some sort of instruction given,
Yeah,
some
he
sort
did
of
it by faith, right?
by faith, right?
So whatever it was that was
Yeah,
wrong with Abel's sacrifice, or was wrong with Cain's sacrifice, it was not done in faith. Is the
correct.
implication there, right? That either it
Yep.
wasn't according to what he had heard, or whatever, right? Or he just did it in a way that was like, well,
Yeah,
God says to do this, but I don't
I
know
mean,
why.
God said, "If you
Yeah,
do good, won't you be rewarded?"
right.
You know.
Yeah,
Um, and then he goes on to Enoch, right? Enoch
yeah,
was, one of the few people talked who aren't recorded to have died. They're just taken to heaven, which was pretty amazing. He was taken up so that he should not see death, and he was not found because God had taken him. He was taken because he pleased God. He was faithful and obedient. Um, and Enoch is said to have pleased God. Abel was said to have pleased God. And so this idea of having faith leading to pleasing God, our creator, um, equals reward, right? And so we see that throughout the scriptures. And then verse 6, and the New King James reads, "Without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him." And
yeah. That's the King James there, right? The
yep,
the
yeah,
diligently
yep,
seeking
exactly.
piece, that we have there. And so he's gonna do this throughout the chapter. He'll basically list off a whole bunch of people, and then he'll make comments about what they did, and what the result of that was. And then occasionally he'll then the author here will intersperse some directive or instruction to his readers, right? Sort of drawing out the point, perhaps, of just in case you missed it, right? So here, as he's laying out these first ones of Abel and of Enoch, right? His point is, you are pleasing to God when you have faith, right?
Yep.
Abel's sacrifice was pleasing to God. Cain's was not. What was the difference? Faith.
Yep.
Enoch in Genesis 5, it says he walked with God
Hmm.
continually, right? And here it says he was pleasing to God. Well, how? Because he walked with him. How? By faith. And so
Hmm.
he consequently was taken. But the point there is, God is pleased with these because of their faithfulness. And you're going to see an interesting thing throughout the chapter as well, which is some of the actions that people take when removed from the faith component become not only not commendable, but awful, right? And we'll see some of those as you go along, right? I mean, treason and human sacrifice, and without these faith components, the actions themselves are would be deemed as even wicked, perhaps.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's the key thing that he's introducing here. It's the faith piece that motivates the act, that causes the action to be pleasing to God.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Are we ready for the next little section there?
Yeah, let's dive into the next chunk then there as he's laid out his initial premise. Let's get some more people here.
All right. Starting in verse 7, it says, "By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, and when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city." So yeah, it's another section here that calls out a lot of the big name characters of the Old Testament,
What
right?
they would consider maybe the patriarchs, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
As you're kind of laying that out. And there's this, if you look at each section and what is the point, right? And so the first one there, he's laying out this idea that it's faith that pleases God. And here he's building on that idea he introduced actually back in verse 1. Where he talks about faith is the evidence of things hoped for, or the substance of things hoped for, and the evidence of things which are not seen, right? And then he lays out things that are not seen. And so he started with the creation of the earth is not seen. Now in this section, he really digs into that idea of the things which are not seen, right?
Correct.
And so he's
in many cases he's talking about future events.
That's right. Noah, right? He was warned of things not seen as yet, right? So God had told him about something that was coming 100+ years later in his life. It's not, he doesn't see the thing. He's just told about it, and he moves, even though he has no reason to believe other than having faith in God and what God has said, right? There's no signs that indicate a flood is going to come. Abraham is called and told to go to a place that he has not seen, right? He doesn't even know where he's going. It's not like there's directions. It's just go and I'll just tell you as you go, right? Kind of a deal.
Yeah.
So he doesn't know where he has, Sarah here is promised a child, when a child that she cannot see, where all physical indications suggest she will not have, right? Even when she conceives, she cannot see that conceiving, right? And all of these things, as you kind of look, even though she sees the child born eventually, right? The point is that the child really is about this future promise, which they still cannot see. And so you see here in this section, the point, the idea being building on faith being about things we don't see, right? The things which we see are not of faith. It's about the things which you don't see. And so he's using these examples here of ones who moved for future events, right? Far distant future events and things which cannot be believed through normal human perception, we might say. And so again, as he talked about there, the faith leads to reward, right, from God. And so 12, therefore sprang from her, one that's as good as dead, as many as the scars in the multitude, and the sand of the sea is innumerable. And then 13, they didn't receive the promises, but they saw them afar off, right? And so there's this play here of the things which aren't seen, but they did see them, right? But they only see them through the eyes of faith and not through sort of these physical eyes.
Yeah, exactly. So, just a couple of interesting things when I think about these characters in particular, in reference to what's spoken about here. I love to teach the evidences class, especially to like the high schoolers. And back in the Clovis congregation, Steve Bird, he's one of the shepherds there. He's also a wildlife biologist, and you know Steve, and he is very, very passionate about science and the Bible, and all of the science stuff that we find throughout the Bible. And so one of the things that God was warning Noah about is quite possibly an event that nobody in the history of the world at that time had ever seen.
Yeah.
And that is rain, right? So it's wildly believed by scientists who've said this thing, and based on scripture, that the earth and its atmosphere was made differently at that time. That when the flood is described, God opened up the canopy of the sky,
yeah,
and unleashed the water, as well as opening up the ground and unleashing the water that was contained in it. And the resulting of which changed our atmosphere, making it a much drier climate, making the radiation from the sun cause life on Earth to not last as long, and causing the polar ice caps that didn't exist prior to that. Antarctica, for instance, used to be a deciduous forest. So anyway, It's super fascinating. But Noah's like, wait, what is this rain? What is this rain you speak about? Like, I don't understand. But God said it. I believe it, and I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And he also preached for 100 years during that time. So, so things like that, and you get to Abraham. He was Abram from Ur in the Chaldeans, aka Babylon, aka he was really wealthy and well off. He had no reason to leave. Why would he take all of his possessions out of this comfortable, amazing? And he was not a young man.
Yeah.
He was a well-established, mature man. And God said, hey, I've got a job for you. I need you to pack up everything and head across the desert.
Yeah.
To this place that you've never heard of.
That's right.
Because hundreds of years in the future, what you do is gonna benefit my kingdom.
Yeah, right. And it's this idea that he says there in when you get into 13, 14, they're the ones who act this way are strangers and sojourners. They're saying to the world by their actions that I don't care about these things that are here. I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for a different and a better homeland. And he says, right, in 16, they yearn for a better land that is the heavenly one. And the result of that, perhaps the greatest reward there, as we talk about, he rewards those who seek him. It says God is not ashamed to be their God,
right,
or to be called their God. He has prepared a city or a place for them. And so this idea, that we're pleasing to God, that God would not be ashamed of us. We were this Sunday, Patrick was doing the Lord's Supper, and as he was, he made an interesting comment about, hey, I want to be here and I want to be in fellowship with God. That seems evident. That seems like a right and good thing. But it's kind of crazy that God would want to be in fellowship with me, right? Like, why would God want to be in fellowship with us? And with me, but it's clear that he does. Jesus is very clear about that when he institutes the Lord's Supper, and all the work that's done by God is so God can be with us. Here we have a similar idea that he's not ashamed to be called there, what he should be, right? Like God should be ashamed to be in the presence of man, from just a purely, human logistical power difference standpoint, right? But when we act in faith, then he is not.
Right.
When we act in faith, then he's pleased with us and he's not ashamed to be called our God, because he's done and he's prepared something for us. And so the city that he's prepared was not a physical city, right? It wasn't Jerusalem. It was that it's this heavenly country that they're looking for. And so that's interesting to me too, that, we sometimes don't think about Abraham as, he goes out to go to this land that God promises to his descendants, but it says that he was actually seeking a heavenly country, is what he was really after, was this heavenly abode, not even a physical promise land for his descendants or any of those kinds of things.
Well, it's interesting, just kind of a parallel thought. When you think about Abraham in that light, it reminds me of Solomon and the book of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon was arguably at the same kind of level as Abraham in terms of like maturity and wealth and comfort and all these things. And yet Solomon went out and sought everything the world had to offer. And the result was it's vanity.
That's right.
This world has nothing to offer. Therefore, we must pursue righteousness and serving God.
Yeah.
Because what we really have to look forward to is a place that is not vanity, but is pure hope and the reality of living with God, which is the greatest reward we can possibly desire. And so many of the gospel letters, hope is at the forefront of all of them. We've already studied through Colossians and First and Second and Third John, and hope and looking forward to the future is a resounding theme that you find throughout the New Testament.
Oh yeah. And it's interesting because when you read the New Testament, you get this very clear picture. And I heard it said, every generation since the cross has believed that they would be the one in which Jesus would return, right? And so when you live in expectation in that way, and it really motivates you, then you can see how that hope and that expectation built on this faith is something you haven't seen, right? Outside of the apostles and whoever was with him on the mountain there when he ascended, no disciple of Christ has seen the ascension, right? And had heard the promise that he's coming back. Everyone just hopes in it based on faith, right? In something they have not seen, but they believe that this was said, this was done. And so we await this thing, and we are looking for that return. We're looking for that heavenly country, just like these were. And just like these, as the Hebrew author has been saying, verse 15, if they had been thinking of the land which they gone out, they had opportunity to return. And that's sort of the problem the Hebrew author is dealing with, right? Is do not return, do not go back, press on to the heavenly country.
Yeah.
And so,
like Lot's wife.
That's right. Yeah. And so, this idea, they had opportunity to return as well, and they did not. And so and his point, he gets to the end, spoiler alert, right, is since we're surrounded by this cloud of witnesses, what should we do? Right. So that's why he's going to lay all these people out.
Yeah.
Is he wants to then motivate his readers to do the same thing. Don't look back. Don't go back to the country you came out, but keep pressing to the heavenly city that God has prepared for those of faith.
Absolutely. All right. Next section.
Yeah, let's dig into it there. What do we go? 17 through
31, I think.
30. Let's see, 30. Yeah, through 31. That's probably right. 17 to 31. All right. It says, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back.
All right, so
faith,
stop right there.
Yeah.
Like, we don't see this context recorded for us.
Right.
It's awesome that we finally have the context of what was going on in Abraham's head.
That's right.
Had he ever we don't have any record of anybody being resurrected from the dead.
That's right.
Leading up to this event.
That's right.
How much faith does it take to imagine that?
Yeah, and he's basing it entirely on, right? His entire basis is the fact that God had already told him, not only was it going to be an heir and all these things, but it was going to be through Isaac, right? God had already told him, nope, it's through Isaac that your seed will be named.
Yep.
And so he says, okay, well, that's what God said. And now God says to kill him. I guess the only way that works is if God's then going to raise him from the dead, right?
Mhm.
Like that's his conclusion that he draws because he has
Yeah.
such faith. Not that God said, "Don't worry about it, I'll take care of it," but because
Yep.
God said it's through Isaac, and so he's
Yeah.
like, "Well, and so that's a fascinating thing too, right? Can you?" I mean, we certainly believe that our children are going to grow up and live long lives and do all these things, right? We don't really know, but it's amazing to think about what Abraham must have thought about Isaac growing up, right? You're like, I know he's going to at least live long enough to have some children, right? And so everything he does in his life, you're like, don't worry about it, right? Don't worry about it. Isaac's fine. Isaac's fine, right? He's good because I know that I'm going to have children through Isaac. So go ahead, Isaac, do whatever you want, I guess, because
Wow.
I have faith that
I
God
never
will
thought
keep
about
you
that.
alive
Yeah,
or raise you from the dead or
that's
whatever.
crazy. That is
And so it's funny because you're right. You read that account, and when you read the account, when Isaac asks, I see all these things, but where is the offering? And he says, God will provide for himself the offering.
Mhm.
And we sometimes read into that when we see how the story plays out, that he must have been thinking, oh well, I'm not actually going to offer Isaac. There will be an offering, and look, oh, there is. It's caught in the thicket, and all these things, right? And the Lord will provide. But here we're told, no, no, no. He fully believed, I'm killing Isaac today. I'm offering him on the altar, and God will resurrect him or something, right?
Yeah.
That's how that's going to play out. Even though you're right, he had never actually seen that happen, nor is there any recorded anything of people being raised from the dead
Yeah. Yeah.
up to that point.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Anyway, sorry, I had to stop us because that's
Yeah.
such an amazing story that
Sure.
didn't want
And
to
again, it's one of those
gloss
cases
over.
again where you get more information here than we do in
Yeah,
the actual story,
exactly.
right?
All right, go
Uh,
ahead. Pick it up there at
Yeah, then in 20, by faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. By faith, Jacob, when dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. By faith, Joseph, at the end of his life, made mention of the exodus of the Israelites and gave directions concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw that the child was beautiful and that they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. By faith, the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies.
It's a crazy list of rapid fire people and events.
Yeah, he runs basically from the sacrificing of Isaac all the way up to the Exodus and the entering into the Promised Land, right? And so that's the connection that he's making there. The promises are going to come through Isaac, and then okay, now I got you all the way to the promises being fulfilled effectively. We've got Israel as a nation; we're there in the land of promise, and so he's kind of drawn that conclusion there.
Yeah.
But this is those sections, like we said before. If you look at the things that are here. Not all of them, but at least 2 of them here, right? If you take out the faith component, one is human sacrifice, right? And Rahab is treason to her home country, right? Those are the actual physical actions they're engaged in. 23, even the hiding of Moses is defying the order of the king, right?
Mm-hmm.
So over and over again, we see these things that are happening here that only the faithfulness of it, only the fact that there's faith involved is what turns that action into something which is pleasing to God. And it's not the action itself so much. Now, the doing of the thing was important, right? Because that's how they demonstrated their faith, but it wasn't the actual killing. It wasn't the hiding. It wasn't the treason. That was the pleasing action. It was the faithfulness of that action. That motivated it.
Well, similar to Abraham, Isaac, when he was nearing his end, right there in 29, he gave instructions concerning his bones. The only people of Israel that were in Egypt at that time was his family.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
400 years later.
Right. He says, we're going to be here for a long time and then we're going to leave. Right.
Yeah.
When we do, I
So,
want you to take me up and
in
bury me.
400 years, y'all take my bones to the promised land, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And that's a funny thing too, right? Because, when you look at that story, Joseph goes back when his father dies and buries him, and the elders of Egypt go up with them and they bury him back in the land of their pilgrimage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly Joseph, and that's interesting too, because Joseph, certainly when he dies, he could have said the same thing, right? This is not, when Joseph dies, he's at the height of his popularity. He's done great things for Egypt. The people are well liked there. They're not this mass of people either. Certainly when Joseph died, he could have had anything he wanted concerning his bones, right? He could have said, bury me back with my father. And they would have been like, great. Yep. We did this already once, 40, 50, 60 years ago, whatever. When your dad died, get the elders of Egypt and the elders of Israel together, and we'll all go and bury the bones, right? And do that there. But instead he says, and so he must be telling them, hey, listen, bury me here because I want to wait until all these things are going to happen, right? And then you're going to take me with you when you go, right? And so even the very fact he could have had it done right away. It's not like there was any reason that said, nope, we can't go back there. Joseph's got to be stayed here. And so instead he says, no, bury me here, and we'll be here for a long time. And then one day when we go again to get what we've actually received, what God has promised, then take me. I don't want to go now. Take me then. Right. And so his action of speaking about his bones was even like a prophetic to his own people there, right? About the Exodus that is to come, something that he could not see or foresee given the current circumstances, right? If you had said, hey, listen, there's going to be in 400 years, you got to be enslaved here. People like, what? People love Joseph, right? What are you talking about? They'd never do that to his family. But he, by faith, he's seeing the good and the bad to come. That's going to lead to the promise.
100%. So was it Moses' faith? Moses.
Yeah, it seems like it must be his parents' faith, right?
His parents had faith. Yeah, right.
He was hidden by faith, right? So it must have been by his parents.
Hidden by faith by his parents. And then when he had his own faith.
Right. Then when he had grown up, he refused to be called the
exactly.
daughter. And there's an interesting thing in there too in 26, right? Which is fascinating. It says here, he considered the reproach of Christ. Now, certainly, Moses wasn't looking for Christ because that's a Greek word, but he was looking for Messiah, right? And so all the way back in the time of Moses, right, the people are looking for this promised Messiah who is to come. And so this predates, captivity. This predates Rome. This predates even the giving of the promise, right? The fulfillment of the promise in the land. They're looking for Messiah all the way back from the garden, right? And so, we have that mentioned here, which again, when you read that story, there's nothing to indicate in the Exodus story that, he considered the reproach of the Messiah greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, right?
Well, I do wonder about just in hindsight.
Yeah.
Suffering in the service of God has always been the reproach of Christ, regardless of anybody's knowledge of Christ.
Yeah.
Right. And so I kind of see it that way, as the reality of actual Moses in his day. He may not have been
maybe
thinking about the Messiah specifically, but he was, as it says here, he was looking to the reward.
He was looking to this other reward, right? And he endured as seeing him who is invisible, right? He wasn't afraid of the king because he saw one who is invisible. Now, certainly, what is he probably seeing and what does he really understand? It's this idea of being faithful to the God of his people, right? And that's the one who is invisible. That is the one to who's promised all of these things. And, again, it's hard to say even in the Exodus time and those kinds of things, what were they expecting? Maybe they were expecting the Messiah would lead them into this promises, right? Into the things that God has promised, the land and all of these kinds of things. Because you don't have this full reconciliation of certainly the heir of David and all that
Mhm.
until much later, certainly. So those pieces of Messiah aren't yet part of the story.
Right.
All you have is that there's the seed of man who's going to come, the seed of woman who's going to come, and
Right,
Christ.
but you have a promise that the creator of the universe, God, their God,
Yep,
was going to rescue
deliver
their
the people.
people,
Yep,
deliver the people. So he
yep,
anchored himself in that hope. And it's the same kind of hope that we're called to anchor ourselves in, which
that's
is
right.
what the offer. That's really the point he's making.
Yeah,
So
and there's kind of two things that are happening there, right? One, he goes and he murders the Egyptian, right? Because he's standing up for his people and doing those things, and so he chooses to be mistreated by the people, or with the people, rather than being Pharaoh's daughter. And then he leaves Egypt, and then he comes back in another kind of faithfulness, right?
right,
And so there's kind of two things going on there: the faithfulness of the reproach by stepping in, and then the faithfulness of return, not fearing the anger of the king. Even though he's going back to a place where he should be under a capital offense, I suppose.
right.
And then he does all the things, right? He follows the sprinkling the blood, keeps the Passover, all the things. Basically, you could summarize this by everything that God told him to do, he did, right? Because
Yep,
he had in the things that are going on there.
yep, exactly. And then we have, of course, the actual Exodus itself. Lots of
Yep,
faith on display there. And then they get in after he just fast forwards through Mount Sinai and all that kind of stuff,
all the things. Yep,
straight into conquest. When and of course the first big battle is at Jericho,
yep,
and it wasn't much of a battle at all. It's like, wait, we're here with this big giant army. Wait, you want us to do what? I just want you to march around the city
walk around the city. Yeah,
once a day, except for the seventh day. Then you're gonna do it 7 times, and then
right.
they're gonna blow the horns and the walls are gonna fall down. Right? We've heard that story as kids. We sing songs about it, and intertwined with that story, you have this story about Rahab.
Yeah,
And the spies went into the city and to just check it out, and Rahab basically knew the reputation of the God of Israel
yeah. I've
had
heard about the things. Yeah,
come preceding the army itself, the people
yeah,
itself, and she's like, that's the God of the universe, and I'm going to serve him.
yeah.
And
I'm gonna
these
send the
people are
spies
his,
the other way.
so
Yeah.
I'm going to protect them. All I ask is that you, in return, protect me.
Yeah. And
So,
it's great here because when
yeah.
we look at the Rahab story, she gets her life and her family is spared.
Mhm.
Uh, but when you look at what's going on, it's interesting because she goes from being Rahab the prostitute,
Mhm.
right, by faith, to being Rahab the ancestor of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And so the real reward, right, is something she doesn't even see. Right.
Mm-mm.
She has when she does that and sends the spies another way, she has no idea that she's going to get intertwined up in the lineage of the Messiah.
Well, she basically becomes a proselyte Jew,
Yeah, right. But she has no clue that, oh yeah, this is somehow going to put me right.
right?
And so that's a fascinating thing that we see that
Really?
faith rewards, but also faith transforms. Right.
Mhm.
She goes from being Rahab the prostitute and Rahab the traitor to Rahab the ancestor of Jesus,
Yeah.
by faith.
Mhm.
Something which again she could not see. Right.
Yeah,
Something she
exactly.
could not foresee happening.
Exactly. All right, let's take the last chunk there
Yeah.
and wrap it up here. Is it your turn to read? I think it is.
I just read, but I'll read if you want.
Oh no, I got it. It's fine. All right, picking it up in verse 32 to the end of the chapter, it says, "And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured, refusing to accept release, so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains, and in dens and caves of the earth. And all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect.
Yeah, so it's interesting that he kind of, I guess, I could keep going forever, right? Basically, but let me just give you the Cliff Notes version here of all the rest of the history of Israel, all the way up through the prophets, and then perhaps even into early Christianity. Here it seems, right?
It does seem that
Or
way.
at least all the way up to Christ, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
You can see John the Baptist perhaps in here, clearly, and going about in sheepskin and being killed with the sword, and these kinds of ideas. But maybe even some of the early martyrs as well. But yeah, he's basically really focusing on the Jewishness of it, because his point is, right, that these ones lived in faith, not under the rule of law, even though they were under the old law, and some of them predate that, but they all lived by faith, regardless of when they lived. That's
Right.
what is pleasing to God is faith, not the keeping of the law. And so he basically gives. Let me just summarize the whole rest of everything for you, right? And all the amazing things that happened.
Yeah.
And some of them are good, right? They quenched the power of fire, and they were mighty in war, and they put foreigners to flight. And others, again, from a human perspective, they suffered mocking and flogging and chains and imprisonment and stone and sawn in two. You're like, wait a minute, these are good things that happened to them, right? But again, it's not the thing that's important; it's the faith that accompanies the thing.
Yep.
Getting flogged is not great. Getting sawn in two is not great. It's the fact that it happens through faith that makes it pleasing to God, right? And what he says there is the world was not worthy of these people, but then this is what's crazy, right? The world was not worthy of these people, and all of these, though, apart from us, would not be made complete or perfect, because God has provided something better. And so that's where he's really going to push into the next chapter there and sort of go, oh man, all of these people that are these heroes of faith, we would say, or the roll call of the faithful, we sometimes call this chapter, right? It's really, the chapter itself is pointless without what's coming after and what came before, right? Otherwise,
Right.
it's just a cool list. But he makes a point. All of these were commended by their faith. God was pleased with them, but they did not receive the promise in their lifetime, right? They did not. They were all looking forward to this better thing, this future thing that requires us for that. That there's this completion that's going to happen only once. These others are brought in as well. And so I'll talk about that more in the next chapter there. But yeah, just
Absolutely.
there.
Well, and it's interesting that the culmination that he kind of references here right at the last verse there is that apart from us, they should not be made perfect.
Right.
So perfection is going to come for all of us through Christ.
That's right. And we'll get to that next time, but we'll get there in verse 2, right, of chapter 12, that Jesus is the finisher or the completer, or he's the beginning and the finisher of our faith, right? And so that's how they couldn't receive any of these things, even though we look and we say some of them received the promises, right? I mean, they went to the promised land, right? David had his kingdom established, and there was actually a son born. What do you mean they didn't receive the promise? No, not the real promise, right? Because the real promise couldn't happen until Christ, because he had to finish the faith.
Absolutely. So listen, chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews is a chapter that I like to go to when I need some encouragement. Maybe I'm struggling, or maybe I'm just going through some stuff, and reading through in pretty quick succession.
Yeah.
All of these people who, it wasn't always amazingly fun, right? It wasn't. They had to struggle through things, but every single one of them were able to maintain their faith and put their hope and trust in God, and even dying without receiving the reward immediately. I mean, Isaac and Jacob, they didn't receive the reward,
Right.
but they helped facilitate it.
Right.
right?
him-
Yeah. And and Abraham, he traveled all around, all across the desert, right? And had to rescue Lot and and see, those two cities destroyed. And he didn't get to enter the promised land,
Right.
you know? And so through Christ, we have the ability to know that we are going to receive that promise of heaven when we pass from this earth. And so, no matter what we're going through, we can anchor ourselves to Christ and His promise, and to know that we're gonna have a great reward. So, there's a lot of things that I'm in East Tennessee, right over the hill from us, right over the Smokies. People are suffering, and dying. So, our prayer continues to be on a daily basis for the people of North Carolina and the western North Carolina, and that whole region that Helene just decimated.
Yeah.
And we pray that they'll get the relief and the hope and the supplies and the care that they need, and a lot of help. So if you just want to pack up and come on out this way, there's a lot of people that could use some more help, boots on the ground and stuff like that. But your prayers would probably be the first thing, followed by your money. So uh, that's what I would recommend. But any final words, Kev?
No, I think you're right. Right, it is an encouraging chapter to read, and I mean, we just spent 45 minutes, but if you just read it, it probably takes you 3 minutes to read through it. Right.
Yeah.
Anytime you feel like you need a pick me up of people who you think you're going through it, right? You want to read about some people who are faithful and who endured and didn't turn back. It's probably a 3-minute read to read chapter 11 there.
100%. So, all right, we'll leave you with that. Comments, question below. Please reach out to us if you need anything. And we pray that God will bless you this week, and we'll see you next time.